I had waited a long time for this moment. The simple act of walking among the trees, with the crunch of dry leaves under my boots and the earthy scent of moisture permeating the air, was exactly what I needed to leave everything behind, even if just for a while. I'd heard about this forest, one so dense that sunlight barely filtered through the high branches, wrapping everything in an almost otherworldly twilight. Each step felt like an escape from the relentless hum of city life, and as I ventured deeper, I relished the rare, complete solitude. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet soil, and everything felt alive, small streams weaving through the trees, patches of moss blanketing fallen logs, birds calling from unseen perches. I felt like a welcome guest in a secret world, a world that held onto mysteries I was only beginning to understand. But as I continued, something shifted. At first, it was nothing, a faint sound behind me, subtle enough to pass as the forest's natural movement. The brush of leaves, the soft crunch of branches snapping, as if something were moving along the trail I'd just passed. I paused, listening, half expecting to see a deer or maybe a rabbit dart across my path. But nothing appeared, just an eerie silence that stretched uncomfortably long. I shook off the feeling, convincing myself it was just my nerves or maybe a curious animal. But as I walked further, the sensation grew. Every few minutes, there would be another rustle or a faint, deliberate crunch on the path just behind me, each sound almost too perfectly timed to my own steps. I tried to brush it off again, forcing myself to ignore the tension creeping up my spine. It's nothing, I thought. Just the forest, alive and breathing. Yet, no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the feeling wouldn't leave. It was a deep, instinctual sense of being watched, something unseen lingering just out of sight, following my every movement. My pace quickened without realizing it, and I kept my eyes on the trail ahead, my heart pounding faster with each step. The forest was darker now, the trees casting thick shadows that seemed to shift and move. Every step felt heavier, each sound around me amplifying in the eerie silence. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something, or someone, was following me. Finally, I stopped, turning fully to face the path behind me. The silence was thick, oppressive, and the dense foliage was so still it felt unnatural. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stood there, trying to find some explanation for the sounds. But there was nothing, no sign of movement, no flash of fur or feathers, only the twisted roots and branches that seemed to reach out toward me. Yet I knew, in the deepest part of my gut, that I was not alone in this forest. I quickened my pace, but no matter how far or fast I went, the footsteps never lagged behind. They were careful, measured, each one mirroring my own pace as though it wanted to blend into the rhythm of my walk. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the footsteps grew, distinct, calculated crunches on the leaves and gravel that stopped exactly when I did, then resumed just as quickly when I tried to outsmart whatever it was. The unease gnawed at me, sharpening my senses to every shadow, every movement, every sound. My attempts to catch a glimpse of whatever was tailing me became almost ritualistic. I tried whirling around suddenly, hoping to surprise whoever was there, only to be met by nothing more than the endless stretch of trees and silence. I crouched low and tried to listen, to see if the sound was nothing more than my imagination, but I could still hear it, footsteps, unmistakable, now circling me even as I stood frozen. Determined to unmask the source, I diverted from the main trail, veering into the denser underbrush where the branches were low and the air was heavy with dampness. But still, the steps continued, not like an animal scurrying or an accidental noise from nature, but purposeful and unbroken. Then, just as I thought I might catch a hint of movement or hear a sound that explained it all, there was silence. Not just quiet, no, it was a vast, yawning stillness that felt as if the entire forest had stopped breathing. Then I saw the marks. A rough, jagged carving etched into the trunk of an ancient tree, a symbol that looked like an I cross with something like claw marks around it. It was almost hidden by the layers of moss growing over it, blending seamlessly into the bark, but the fresh scars looked recent, like someone had tried to claw through the bark in desperation. It wasn't the only one either. As I walked further, more trees appeared with different marks, some scratched symbols, others long and violent gouges that seemed almost human but not quite. A memory stirred as I stared at the markings, a warning I'd brushed off back in town. The local shopkeeper's voice echoed in my mind. People go into those woods sometimes, tourists, hikers, curious folk who don't believe the stories. Some don't come back. Those who do are changed. I'd waved it off as a local legend, something to spook out-of-towners, a strange custom or ghost story that clings to places like this. What kind of stories? I'd asked, trying to humor him. He paused then, a shadow crossing his face. They say something follows people in there, something that only comes out when you're alone and far enough from anyone else to hear your cries for help. His tone had shifted, voice almost pleading. Sometimes, they come out with no memory of what happened, but strange marks on their bodies. Other times, he trailed off, lowering his gaze. They say those who hear the footsteps are marked by something that never truly leaves them alone. The memory struck me like a cold wind, and suddenly, those marks on the trees felt heavier, more menacing. There was something purposeful to them, as if someone, or something, had left them as a warning. A warning for me, specifically. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself that it was all a trick of my mind, a natural response to the isolation and the depth of the forest. But that laugh died in my throat when I heard it again. I forced myself to keep moving, trying to block out the strange marks on the trees and the nagging memory of the shopkeeper's warning. The footsteps continued behind me, now relentless, more persistent than ever. Sometimes, they echoed from my left, other times from my right, and then, disturbingly, from all around me. I strained my ears, trying to catch the pattern, but the sound seemed to blend and multiply, turning the once peaceful forest into a chaotic maze of noise and shadows. The silence of the forest had been unsettling enough, but this, a cacophony of footsteps encircling me like a predator stalking its prey, felt unbearable. I quickened my steps, breaking into a near jog, feeling the dry leaves and twigs snap under my feet with a rhythm that soon turned erratic and panicked. The sound of footsteps mirrored my pace, matching each frantic beat as if whoever, or whatever, was following me was playing a twisted game, testing just how far I could go before breaking. Desperate for a moment of clarity, I stopped again, willing myself to take deep breaths, to regain my sense of control. But as soon as I paused, the footsteps ceased too, leaving me trapped in a ring of unnatural silence. I checked my surroundings, but there was nothing unusual, no sign of life, just the thick shadows creeping between the trees, lingering like silent spectators. With a trembling hand, I reached into my backpack to pull out my water bottle, hoping a drink would calm me. As my fingers closed around the bottle, they brushed against something cold and metal, something I didn't recognize. Confused, I pulled it out, a small, rusted pocket watch. It looked ancient, its glass scratched, its hands frozen at 3:15. My mind raced, struggling to recall if I packed it somehow by mistake, but I knew I hadn't. This wasn't mine. I threw it back into the bag, my pulse pounding as I tried to shake off the feeling that it had been planted there intentionally. But the shock of that pocket watch lingered, filling me with a rising dread. I pulled the bag closer, searching through each item, desperate to make sense of the growing unease. Then I found a small photograph buried at the bottom, yellowed with age, showing a lone figure standing on a path uncannily similar to the one I was on. The figure's face was scratched out, leaving only a blank void where their features should have been. My hand began to shake as I dropped the photo back into the bag. I scanned my surroundings, feeling more certain than ever that I wasn't alone, that someone, or something, was actively watching me, tracking my every move. The footsteps resumed, closer now, growing in number as though an invisible crowd had gathered to follow me. I forced myself to move, no longer caring about the direction, just needing to escape. But each step only seemed to draw the sound closer. I picked up my pace, the branches clawing at my clothes, the leaves crunching beneath me as I tore through the undergrowth. And all the while, the footsteps echoed around me, from every angle, in every direction, relentless and impossible to outrun. My thoughts began to blur. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the fear, or worse, maybe I was beginning to lose my grip on reality. I stopped to catch my breath, bending over with my hands on my knees, every nerve in my body tingling with a raw, electric fear. I'd lost track of how long I'd been running, and the forest around me seemed unfamiliar, as if it had shifted and rearranged itself, trapping me in an endless loop. In a moment of desperation, I emptied my pack completely, scattering its contents onto the forest floor, hoping to make sense of what was real and what wasn't. And that's when I saw it, a worn, leather-bound journal that looked like it had been there for years, waterlogged and covered in dirt. I knew for certain I hadn't brought it with me. With trembling hands, I flipped it open, only to find pages filled with frantic handwriting, warnings scrawled over and over, the ink smeared and fading. It watches. It follows. You cannot escape. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, almost dropping the book. My thoughts spiraled as I wondered if someone had put these items in my pack to terrify me, to play with my mind. Or worse, was it me? Had I blacked out and placed them there myself? The questions gnawed at me, twisting reality until I could hardly tell where my own memories ended and these horrors began. And then, as I stood there paralyzed by fear and confusion, I felt it, a soft, unmistakable breath against the back of my neck. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I bolted through the trees, every nerve in my body on fire. Rational thought had slipped away, replaced by a single, overwhelming need to escape. Yet no matter how far I ran or how many twists and turns I took, the forest around me remained the same, its gnarled trees and shadowed paths closing in tighter, warping around me like a prison. The trails, once familiar, now seemed to stretch endlessly, curling back on themselves in bizarre loops. I tried retracing my steps, certain I'd taken the right path toward the exit, but each attempt only led me deeper into the dense maze of trees. No landmarks, no sense of direction, only the oppressive, unchanging forest. The footsteps persisted, louder and closer than ever, their steady rhythm shifting erratically as if taunting me. The pace would quicken, slow, stop suddenly, then start again with renewed intensity. It was as though whoever was following me wanted me to hear, wanted me to know that escape was impossible. My pulse thundered as I took off down yet another path, desperate to find some sense of familiarity, some proof that I could still find my way out. But as I sprinted, I noticed that the trees around me began to look more twisted, the branches longer, clawing toward the ground with a menacing reach. Shadows clustered thicker here, cloaking everything in an unnatural darkness. I felt as if I were running in circles, trapped in a horrible game of hide and seek that I was doomed to lose. Just when I thought I'd lose myself completely, I saw it, a small clearing up ahead, barely visible through the dense underbrush. Relief washed over me, and I stumbled forward, hoping for a reprieve from the relentless chase. But as I stepped into the clearing, my relief curdled into dread. An abandoned campsite sat in the center, eerily still, like a forgotten graveyard. 3 tents, collapsed and weather-beaten, lay scattered around a fire pit filled with ashes long gone cold. Empty cans, shredded tarps, and pieces of cloth littered the ground, covered in a thin layer of moss. It was as if the forest had begun reclaiming it, pulling it back into the earth. I moved cautiously toward the remnants of the camp, drawn by a strange, sinking feeling that I was not the first to experience this. I picked up a worn boot that looked out of place, old and battered, its sole barely holding on. Next to it lay a crumpled, half-buried map, smeared with faded ink but still showing a rough sketch of the forest. Red crosses marked several points on the map, and scrawled next to one of them were the words "Do not stop. Do not look back." Chills spread through me as I looked closer, noticing a haphazard stack of journals and notebooks scattered around a tree stump. I knelt down and picked one up, its cover tattered, its pages filled with frantic writing. As I flipped through it, I found entries describing someone else's journey, notes from a previous hiker who had experienced the same horrors. The footsteps won't stop. It follows no matter where I go. I can't tell if it's real or if the forest is playing tricks on me. Another entry, written in a shaky hand, read, "I tried to leave, but every path brings me back." I saw my own footprints leading me here. The words seemed to blur before my eyes, the meaning sinking in with a dreadful clarity. It wasn't just me. Others had been lost in these woods, and none of them had made it out. I flipped through more pages, catching glimpses of drawings, eerie symbols similar to the ones carved into the trees, cryptic warnings written in broken sentences, desperate pleas for help. The last entry stopped abruptly. "It's closer now. I can hear it breathing." A gust of cold wind passed through the clearing, sending a shiver down my spine. My gaze drifted to a small, makeshift altar someone had built by a tree. It held strange trinkets, an old compass with a shattered glass face, a child's doll with a missing eye, and a stack of rocks arranged in a precise but unsettling pattern. The items felt deeply personal, mementos of lives that had been lost here, swallowed by the endless forest. Just as I was turning away, something caught my eye, a Polaroid photo pinned to the tree trunk, barely held by a rusted nail. It was faded, the colors almost completely washed out, but I could still make out the blurry figure of a person standing in a thick forest, the same forest I was now trapped in. A jolt of recognition hit me. I was almost certain it was the same figure I'd seen in the photograph that had appeared mysteriously in my pack. The sound of footsteps snapped me out of my daze. They were louder now, encircling the campsite as though whoever was out there had finally cornered me. Panic surged as I backed away, my mind racing with the realization that I was completely, utterly lost. I grabbed the map from the ground, clinging to the small hope that it might offer a way out, but as I studied it, my heart sank. None of the trails marked on it matched anything I had seen. The paths and landmarks seemed to shift and change, twisting and turning into a maze with no exit. Desperate, I stumbled out of the campsite, not caring where I was going, only needing to get away. My head spun as the footsteps grew louder, erratic, as if several people were walking in mismatched rhythms, closing in from every direction. I ran blindly, not caring about the branches that scratched at my skin or the roots that tripped my feet. My breaths came in gasps, sharp and painful, my body screaming for rest, but I couldn't stop, not with the sounds closing in around me. Suddenly, I stumbled over a thick root and fell hard onto the ground. The impact rattled through me, leaving me dazed. For a moment, the forest went silent again, the footsteps stopping as if to watch and savor my helplessness. I lay there, too stunned to move, my face pressed against the cold earth. The air around me grew heavy, dense with a silence that felt alive. Then, in the stillness, I felt it once more, an unmistakable warmth, a slow, deliberate breath against the back of my neck. Night had fallen, swallowing the forest in a thick, impenetrable darkness. The shadows around me, already unsettling in the dim light of day, grew monstrous under the weight of the night. Every direction I looked, the trees stood tall and motionless, their twisted branches looming overhead like skeletal arms reaching out, trapping me in their grasp. I had lost all sense of direction, my mind a blur of panic and exhaustion. The air was thick with silence, a silence so heavy it felt as if the forest were holding its breath. But one sound persisted, the footsteps. They were closer now, so near that I could almost feel the vibrations in the earth beneath my feet. The measured, relentless crunch of leaves echoed around me, unearthingly clear against the silent night, as if whoever, or whatever, was following me wanted to be heard, wanted me to know that escape was hopeless. I'd stop occasionally, frozen in place, hoping that if I held my breath and stayed absolutely still, they might fade away, but each time I stopped, they would too, only to resume as soon as I took another step. My vision played tricks on me in the dark. At the edge of my sight, I'd catch glimpses of movement, faint and fleeting. Shapes drifted between the trees, darting back and forth like whispers of shadow, barely visible before melting back into the darkness. Each time I turned to look, they vanished, leaving nothing but the silent, empty forest. But they were there, I could feel it, a presence lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting. I pushed forward, my pulse hammering, my mind straining against the fear threatening to overtake me. As I stumbled through the underbrush, my foot caught on something, sending me sprawling forward. My hands scraped against the rough earth as I hit the ground, and in the low light, I spotted a small, worn leather-bound journal half buried beneath a layer of decaying leaves. The sight of it filled me with an eerie sense of déjà vu. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I lifted the book and brushed the dirt off its cover. I opened it, the pages stiff and yellowed with age, and began to read, my heart pounding as I took in the words scrawled in a shaky hand. There is something here. Something that follows. I read on, my breath catching as I absorbed the writer's frantic, disjointed thoughts. It watches, always just behind me, always just out of sight. I have tried to run, tried to find a way out, but every path leads me back here. I don't know how long I've been walking. Time means nothing in this place. It twists and loops until I'm not sure if I'm awake or dreaming. If anyone finds this, know that there is a watcher in these woods, a shadow that haunts anyone who dares to enter. A chill ran through me, and my gaze darted nervously around the trees, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows, observing me as I read. The footsteps grew louder as if in response to my discovery, and I snapped the journal shut, tucking it into my pack with a nervous glance over my shoulder. I stood, my legs shaky as I resumed walking, feeling the watcher's presence press closer with each step. The shapes at the edge of my vision grew more distinct, tall, shadowy figures moving between the trees with impossible speed. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of what seemed to be a face, pale and indistinct, with hollow, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there, just the cold, silent forest stretching endlessly around me. The sense of being watched grew unbearable, and I broke into a run, my breaths coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I could feel them closing in, the watchers, their footsteps now almost beside me, moving in an unnatural rhythm that mirrored my own. Shadows darted at the corners of my eyes, flitting through the trees like dark phantoms. I stumbled to a stop, my chest heaving as I frantically scanned my surroundings. The shadows were closer now, surrounding me, closing in with every second. My mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and confusion as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. The footsteps, once a distant echo, were now deafeningly close, so near that I could almost feel their presence beside me. In a desperate attempt to confront whatever was following me, I turned sharply, half expecting to see a figure standing there. But there was nothing, only the dark, empty forest stretching into the shadows. My own footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the silence, echoing through the trees like a ghostly chorus. Suddenly, I felt a presence directly behind me, closer than ever before. The air grew cold, and a shiver ran down my spine as I sensed something watching me, standing just inches away. I didn't dare to turn around, afraid of what I might see, afraid of facing the watcher that haunted the forest. The footsteps fell silent, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I could feel a faint, cold breath on the back of my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible from this cursed place. But as I took a step forward, the shadows shifted, and I saw a figure in the corner of my vision, a tall, dark shape standing between the trees, motionless, watching. It was just a silhouette, barely visible in the darkness, but I could feel its gaze, piercing and unyielding, following my every move. I turned to face it, but as soon as I did, it disappeared, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. My heart raced, and I struggled to catch my breath, feeling as if the forest itself was closing in around me, trapping me in its endless maze. I forced myself to keep moving, the watcher's presence lingering just out of sight, always a step behind, always watching. The trees seemed to shift and twist around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms, their shadows stretching and bending in unnatural ways. I was no longer sure of what was real and what was a figment of my fear-addled mind. The journal's warning echoed in my thoughts, a chilling reminder of the hopelessness that had consumed those who had come before me. There is a watcher in these woods, a shadow that haunts anyone who dares to enter. I had thought it was just a story, a product of someone's overactive imagination, but now, trapped in the heart of the forest with the watcher's presence growing ever closer, I knew it was real. I didn't know how long I'd been wandering, the sense of time slipping away as I moved through the endless maze of trees. Hours, days, maybe even longer, it all blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. The footsteps never faded, never stopped, always trailing just behind me, relentless in their pursuit. At times, I felt as if I could almost see them, dark shapes flitting between the trees, their hollow eyes watching me from the shadows. Each time I turned, they would vanish, leaving only the whisper of footsteps and the oppressive silence of the forest. And then, as the night wore on, I began to see more signs, carvings on the trees, symbols and marks left by those who had come before me, each one a silent warning of the horrors that lurked within the forest. Some were fresh, as if left only days ago, while others were old and weathered, nearly erased by the passage of time. They marked the path I walked, a grim reminder of the countless souls who had lost themselves in this cursed place. My strength was waning, my mind fraying under the relentless pressure of fear and exhaustion. I knew I couldn't keep running forever, knew that sooner or later, the watcher would catch up with me. The footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing through the trees with a maddening rhythm that seemed to seep into my very bones. Desperation clawed at me, and I found myself muttering under my breath, pleading with the unseen presence to let me go, to release me from its grasp. But there was no answer, only the cold, unyielding silence of the forest and the relentless footsteps trailing behind me. As I stumbled forward, barely able to keep myself upright, I felt a sudden surge of cold, a presence, unmistakable, pressing against me from all sides. Shadows swirled around me, and I saw them, figures, tall and dark, standing among the trees, watching me with hollow eyes that seemed to burn through the darkness. I froze, paralyzed by the weight of their gaze, feeling as if they were judging me, weighing my very soul. And in that moment, I knew there was no escape, no way out of the forest's grasp. The Watcher had claimed me, just as it had claimed all those who had come before me, lost to the shadows, forever wandering the endless labyrinth of trees. I felt a final, shuddering breath against the back of my neck, and the world went dark, the forest closing in around me, the Watcher's gaze consuming everything. I was no longer sure if I was walking or drifting, if my legs were moving forward or simply following some ancient rhythm buried deep within the forest itself. The footsteps behind me, once a mere echo, now mirrored my own steps with eerie precision, each crunch of the leaves, each snap of a twig, perfectly synchronized with my movements. It felt as though the Watcher wasn't just following me anymore, it was within me, controlling my every step, weaving itself into my thoughts, my breath, my very being. The whispers began softly at first, just a faint murmur riding the wind, words too faint to understand yet too chilling to ignore. They seemed to rise from the depths of the earth itself, vibrating through the roots and the stones, winding through the branches overhead. As I walked, they grew louder, filling the air around me, blending with the rustle of leaves and the creak of old wood. Words drifted in and out of my mind, strange, fragmented phrases that felt ancient and powerful, like chants or incantations from a forgotten tongue. The whispers pressed in on me, closing around me like a shroud, smothering any remaining hope I might have had. But it was the footsteps that unnerved me the most. Every time I tried to change my pace, slowing down, speeding up, stopping abruptly, the echo behind me responded in kind, moving in perfect unison. No matter what I did, the Watcher matched me, step for step, breath for breath. I tried to shake it, running until my lungs burned, but each time I would hear the exact same frantic footsteps following me, as if my shadow had come alive, dogging my every step. Desperation clawed at me as I fought to escape, plunging through the dense underbrush, my clothes tearing on brambles, my skin scraped raw by branches. But the forest seemed to grow thicker around me, the trees closing in, blocking every possible path of escape. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could feel the dread settling in my bones, a cold certainty that there was no way out. Then, as I stumbled deeper into the heart of the forest, I began to notice them, the carvings. Symbols etched into the trees, crude but precise, patterns that seemed almost ritualistic in their complexity. They varied in size and shape, but each one held an unmistakable aura of foreboding, as though they were warnings meant to repel any who dared enter this place. They reminded me of ancient wards, barriers meant to hold back something unspeakable. As I moved past them, more symbols appeared, not only on the trees, but on the rocks, on the very ground I walked. Some looked like twisted, deformed faces, their hollow eyes staring up at me in silent judgment. Others resembled coiled serpents, their bodies contorted into unnatural shapes, their jaws wide as if in a silent scream. The carvings grew more intricate as I ventured further, their details disturbing and otherworldly, like something that didn't belong to this world. A creeping dread settled over me as I realized what these symbols meant. They weren't simply warnings, they were markers, guides leading me somewhere, pulling me deeper into the forest's grasp. It was as if the Watcher was guiding me, controlling my path, drawing me closer to its hidden domain. The symbols became less frequent as I went, replaced by larger, more ominous carvings that seemed to radiate a dark energy, filling the air with an oppressive weight that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The whispers grew louder, taking on a sinister tone, their words twisted and warped, dripping with malice. I couldn't understand the language, but the meaning was clear, seeping into my mind like a poison, filling me with a dread so profound it felt like my soul itself was withering. They were calling me, pulling me deeper, urging me to surrender, to give myself over to the Watcher, to become part of this place, just like those who had come before me. A flicker of memory surged through me, fragments of warnings from the journal entries I'd found, the scribbled words of those who had been lost here before me. There's a Watcher in these woods, a shadow that haunts anyone who dares to enter. The words repeated in my mind, a mantra of despair, a confirmation of my worst fears. I wasn't just lost in the forest, I was becoming part of it, ensnared in a cycle of fear and madness that had claimed countless others before me. As I pressed forward, my senses dulled by exhaustion and fear, I noticed something strange, a circle of stones arranged in the clearing ahead. They were ancient, covered in moss and lichen, their surfaces edged with more of the cryptic symbols I had seen carved into the trees. The stones formed a perfect ring, as if marking a sacred or forbidden place. I stopped at the edge of the circle, my body trembling with an overwhelming sense of dread. The air around me felt colder, heavier, as though some invisible force was pressing down, warning me not to enter. But something beyond my control compelled me forward, an invisible hand guiding my steps as I crossed into the circle. The moment I entered, the whispers fell silent, and the forest around me grew deathly still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. I could feel eyes on me, hundreds of eyes hidden in the shadows, watching, waiting. The ground inside the circle was covered in strange symbols, intricate patterns that wove together in a chaotic dance of lines and shapes. I realized, with a sickening lurch, that they formed a pattern, a map, perhaps, or a ritual designed to bind and trap. At the center of the circle lay a single stone slab, its surface smooth and polished, reflecting the dim light that filtered through the trees. As I approached, my heart thundered in my chest, my skin prickling with fear. The whispers resumed, softer now, but more insistent, urging me forward, guiding my hand as I reached out to touch the stone. My fingers brushed its surface, and a jolt of energy surged through me, a cold, electric shock that rattled through my bones. Images flashed through my mind, visions of faces twisted in terror, eyes wide and staring, mouths frozen in silent screams. I saw figures stumbling through the forest, trapped in an endless maze, pursued by shadows, haunted by the Watcher. Each vision ended the same way, a final, desperate plea for escape, followed by silence, their voices swallowed by the forest, their souls consumed by the darkness. The footsteps resumed, louder than ever, circling around the edge of the clearing, drawing closer with each passing second. I spun around, heart pounding, searching for a way out, but the forest around me had transformed, the trees now towering over me like prison bars, blocking any path of escape. The Watchers were all around me now, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, their whispers growing louder, filling the air with their sinister chant. The symbols carved into the trees seemed to pulse with a dark energy, their lines twisting and shifting, warping in ways that defied logic. They no longer felt like warnings, they felt like marks of ownership, signs that I was no longer free, that I had been claimed by the forest, by the Watcher. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat, swallowed by the silence that pressed in around me, heavy and suffocating. The footsteps grew louder, merging with the whispers, a cacophony of dread that filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts, my very sense of self. And then, as if answering my silent plea for escape, the Watcher revealed itself. A shadow detached from the darkness, tall and slender, its form twisting and shifting, its face obscured by a veil of shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, 2 points of light in the darkness, filled with a malevolent intelligence that bore into my soul, stripping away every layer of my being. The Watcher's gaze held me captive, paralyzing me with a fear so intense it felt as though my heart would burst. I could feel its presence seep into me, filling every corner of my mind, every fiber of my being, until there was nothing left but darkness, an endless void of terror and despair. I realized, in that final moment, that I was not the first to stand before the Watcher. The faces I had seen, the voices I had heard, they were all here, trapped within the forest, bound to the Watcher's will, lost forever in its grasp. As the darkness closed in around me, the footsteps fell silent, the whispers fading into the void. I could feel my identity slipping away, my memories, my thoughts, everything that made me who I was, dissolving into the endless night. I was becoming part of the forest, part of the Watcher, bound to this ancient place, just as those who had come before me. Exhaustion gnawed at me, a relentless beast consuming my energy as I staggered deeper into the shadowy heart of the forest. My legs felt like lead, my breaths came in ragged gasps, and my mind swirled with a fog of fear and confusion. The whispers and footsteps had grown deafening, an unending cacophony echoing through my thoughts, drowning out reason and clarity. Each heartbeat thudded loudly in my ears, a grim reminder of the life I had once lived, a life that felt impossibly distant as the shadows pressed in around me. Just as despair threatened to swallow me whole, I caught a fleeting glimpse of it, a shape lurking at the edge of my vision, dark and indistinct against the backdrop of trees. My heart raced, pumping adrenaline through my veins as I turned sharply to face it. There it was, a vague figure, its outline blurred and shifting like smoke, but what struck me most were its eyes, two piercing points of light reflecting the pale moonlight, glimmering with a predatory intelligence that sent chills racing down my spine. For a heartbeat, time froze. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the whispers fading to a tense silence as I locked eyes with the creature that had been stalking me. In that brief moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of panic. I knew I should run, but my body betrayed me, rooted to the spot, caught in the hypnotic pull of those luminous eyes. But as quickly as the figure had appeared, it vanished into the darkness, swallowed whole by the forest as if it had never existed. The moment our gaze broke, it was gone, leaving behind only the echo of its presence, a lingering, hollow feeling of dread that gnawed at the edges of my sanity. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding furiously against my ribs, realization crashing over me like a wave. I was trapped in a cycle that mirrored the fates of those who had come before me, those whose souls were ensnared by the Watcher. The forest had claimed me, and I was becoming part of its twisted legacy, a pawn in a game I could not comprehend. I fought against the tide of despair rising within me, urging myself to break free, to find a way out, but my mind felt heavy and muddled, ensnared in the same darkness that had ensnared others. As I pressed forward, I felt a sudden urge to search for something, anything that might provide a clue, a piece of information that could help me escape this nightmare. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, needed to find a way to break the cycle. My eyes scanned the forest floor, brushing over the litter of leaves and branches, desperate for a sign of hope. And then, beneath a twisted root, I spotted it, another note, its edges worn and crumpled, as if it had been tucked away and forgotten. I reached for it, my hands trembling as I pulled it from the earth. The note was stained and faded, the ink barely legible, but I forced myself to read through the haze of fear and exhaustion. If you are reading this, know that you are not alone. I, too, was followed, trapped in this nightmare. I saw it, a dark figure with eyes like fire, lurking in the shadows. I thought I could escape, thought I could find a way out, but the forest has its ways of trapping those who dare to enter. I tried to warn others, tried to leave a mark, but the whispers grew louder, drowning out my voice. The Watcher sees everything, it knows your fears, your secrets, and it will use them against you. Trust no one, not even yourself. You are a part of this forest now, a part of something ancient and terrifying. The note trembled in my hands as I read the last line, the chilling truth seeping into my bones. I was a part of this forest, a part of the cycle of fear and despair that had ensnared countless others. The weight of hopelessness threatened to crush me as I looked around, the trees looming above, the shadows thickening at the edges of my vision. I stumbled back, panic rising in my throat as the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. I had to get out. I had to escape before the watcher claimed me completely. But as I turned to flee, the forest shifted, the trees closing in around me, blocking every path. The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet, and I realized with growing horror that I was becoming disoriented again. The darkness deepened, and the whispers twisted into a mocking chorus, taunting me, echoing the same words from the note. You are a part of this forest now. My legs moved on instinct as I wove through the trees, my heart pounding in my chest, desperate to escape the cycle that threatened to consume me. Each step felt like a battle, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the forest conspired against me, twisting and shifting like a living entity. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me, and I could feel the watcher's presence creeping closer, the footsteps echoing my own, mirroring my every move, taunting me with their relentless pursuit. As I sprinted through the trees, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the dark figure closing in, but instead, I caught only shadows. The forest was alive, shifting around me, a maze that refused to yield any hint of escape. Panic clawed at my throat, and I felt my mind beginning to fray at the edges, the whispers intensifying into a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something, a flicker of movement, a shadow darting between the trees. I stopped, heart racing, and turned to face it. But as soon as I did, it vanished again, slipping into the darkness like water through my fingers. The forest was playing tricks on me, drawing me deeper into its web of fear and confusion. I pressed on, determined to break free from this twisted cycle, but the deeper I went, the more distorted reality became. I stumbled upon more symbols carved into the bark of the trees, familiar shapes from the note, more warnings, more reminders of the souls trapped in this nightmarish labyrinth. It felt as if the forest was mocking me, relishing in my confusion, its malevolent energy seeping into my bones. With each passing moment, I felt the watcher drawing closer, its presence suffocating, pressing in from all sides. The whispers grew more insistent, a constant murmur that wrapped around me like a shroud, urging me to surrender, to give into the darkness. I could feel my resolve weakening, the fear gnawing at my mind, threatening to swallow me whole. Then, I stumbled into a clearing, a small pocket of open space surrounded by towering trees. The moon hung high above, casting silvery light across the ground, illuminating the area with an eerie glow. But as I stood there, panting and disoriented, I felt the weight of the watcher's gaze settle over me like a cloak. I glanced around, searching for a way out, a path that could lead me back to the world beyond the forest. But there was nothing, only the oppressive silence, the shadows looming, and the whispers growing louder, drowning out my thoughts. My heart raced as I spun around, desperation clawing at my chest. Then I saw it, a faint flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing, something shifting in the shadows. I turned toward it, adrenaline surging through me, and took a step forward, my instincts screaming at me to run. But as I approached, the shape shifted, twisting into a familiar outline, the dark figure with the reflective eyes. It was closer now, more defined, its features obscured, but its presence undeniable. My heart pounded in my chest as I faced it, the fear coursing through me like a jolt of electricity. I could feel the weight of its gaze upon me, piercing through the darkness, searching for something deep within me. Then, just as before, it vanished, leaving me alone in the clearing. The silence pressed in around me, thick and suffocating, and I could feel the whispers returning, swirling around me, weaving a tapestry of dread that pulled me deeper into the darkness. I stood frozen, my mind racing, grasping for a way to escape this nightmare. The forest had claimed me, twisted my thoughts into something unrecognizable, and I felt my sanity slipping away like sand through my fingers. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. I was trapped, ensnared in a cycle that I couldn't break. The Watcher was a part of me now, a shadow lurking in the depths of my mind, echoing my fears, feeding on my despair. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim my identity before it was too late. But as I looked around the clearing, the shadows began to shift again, morphing into grotesque shapes that flickered at the corners of my vision. The whispers intensified, rising to a fever pitch, wrapping around me like a noose, tightening with every heartbeat. In a desperate attempt to break free, I turned and ran, sprinting back into the darkness of the forest, ignoring the exhaustion that clawed at my limbs. The footsteps chased me, echoing my every move, and the whispers surged into a chaotic symphony of sound that threatened to drown me. I stumbled over roots and rocks, pushing myself to keep moving, to escape the grasp of the Watcher that sought to claim me. But no matter how fast I ran, I could feel it closing in, its presence. My heart raced as I sprinted through the suffocating darkness, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The forest felt alive, twisting and shifting around me, as if it were a beast intent on consuming me whole. The whispers grew louder, rising to a cacophony that echoed in my mind, drowning out rational thought. Panic surged within me, a relentless tide that threatened to sweep me away. I could feel the footsteps closing in, an unyielding presence that mirrored my every move, taunting me with its relentless pursuit. Just when I thought I could run no further, my legs trembling beneath me, I reached a moment of clarity, a flicker of determination amidst the chaos. I could no longer allow fear to dictate my actions. I had to confront whatever was stalking me, whatever had ensnared me in this nightmarish cycle. I turned abruptly, heart pounding, my fists clenched at my sides, ready to face the darkness. The forest was eerily silent for a heartbeat, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. I stood there, bracing myself, the weight of the shadows pressing in on me. I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins, propelling me forward as I called out into the void, "Show yourself." The air thickened with tension, and the shadows around me began to shift, coalescing into a form that sent chills racing down my spine. A twisted, spectral figure emerged from the darkness, its shape shifting and undulating as if it were made of smoke and shadows. The air grew colder, the whispers receding into an eerie silence, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing. Its features were indistinct, a swirling mass of darkness, but its eyes, two glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through the gloom, were fixed upon me. I felt the weight of its gaze, heavy and suffocating, as if it were searching for something deep within me. In that moment, I understood that this creature was the Watcher, the embodiment of the darkness that had haunted me since I first entered the forest. "Why?" I croaked, my voice barely rising above a whisper. "Why have you chosen me?" The figure shifted closer, its form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. It seemed to absorb the moonlight, twisting it into grotesque shapes that danced at the edges of my vision. "Chosen," it echoed, its voice a dissonant symphony of whispers and growls. "You are not chosen. You are one of many, a thread in a tapestry woven by the forest itself. You sought solitude, a respite from your own existence. But the forest feeds on your fear, on your darkness." My heart raced as the realization washed over me, flooding my veins with cold dread. I had been drawn here not just by the allure of nature, but by my own inner turmoil, my own hidden fears and regrets. The forest had sensed my vulnerability, had fed off my despair, drawing me deeper into its grasp. You've become part of its cycle, the Watcher continued, its voice echoing with an eerie resonance. Just as those before you, you will wander, lost and broken, a ghost among the living. You are not alone, you will join the others who have fallen, the lost souls who remain here forever. No! I shouted, desperation surging through me. I refused to accept this. My heart pounded against my ribs as I struggled against the crushing weight of despair. I won't let you take me. The Watcher's form flickered, its eyes narrowing as it moved closer, looming over me like a dark cloud. You cannot escape what is within you. The forest knows you, it knows your fears. You cannot outrun the darkness you carry. With each word, I felt the shadows tightening around me, pulling me toward the abyss. Panic surged within me as I recalled the faces of those who had come before me, their haunted expressions forever etched in my mind. I refused to join them. I would fight back with every ounce of strength I had left. In that moment of defiance, I reached deep within myself, searching for the spark of hope that had been buried under layers of fear and despair. I thought of my life before the forest, of the joys I had known and the love I had shared. I thought of the light that existed even in the darkest moments. I am not defined by my fears. I cried out, feeling a surge of power radiate from my core. I am more than this darkness. The figure hesitated, its form wavering as if my words had struck a chord. The shadows surrounding me pulsed, the whispers fading into an almost harmonious silence. I took a step forward, emboldened by my newfound determination. I will not become one of your lost souls. In that moment, the Watcher recoiled, its form twisting violently as if struggling against an unseen force. I could feel the darkness receding, the oppressive weight lifting from my shoulders. My breath came easier, and I took another step forward, pushing against the shadows. Leave this place. I shouted, the command resonating through the air. You will not take me. With each word, the forest around me began to shift. The trees that had once felt like prison bars now stood tall and proud, the moonlight filtering through the leaves, illuminating the path ahead. The whispers faded into the background, replaced by the sounds of rustling leaves and distant night creatures. The Watcher's form flickered, its eyes glowing with a mix of rage and disbelief. You cannot escape, it hissed, its voice rising in fury. You belong to the forest. But as I took one more step forward, I felt a rush of energy course through me. The ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse with life, the very essence of the forest shifting in response to my resolve. I was not just a wanderer, I was a part of something greater, a force that could not be contained. As I turned to run, the figure lunged toward me, its form twisting into a horrific visage of anguish and fury. But I felt the light within me growing stronger, pushing against the darkness, creating a barrier that shielded me from its grasp. I sprinted through the trees, the path ahead illuminated by a shimmering glow that guided me forward, away from the abyss. The forest seemed to shift around me, the shadows retreating as I dashed through the clearing. The weight of the Watcher's gaze faded, replaced by the promise of escape. I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath me, the life surrounding me urging me onward. I was breaking free. But just as I thought I had evaded its grasp, the whispers surged back, louder and more frantic than ever. You cannot escape your fate. You are bound to this place. I pushed myself harder, my legs moving with an urgency fueled by fear and determination. The trees began to thin, and in the distance, I saw a glimmer of light, a beacon of hope shining through the dense foliage. I felt the pull of the outside world, the promise of freedom urging me forward. Then, in one heart-stopping moment, I burst into a clearing bathed in moonlight. The air felt different here, lighter, as if I had crossed an invisible threshold. I stumbled to a halt, panting, and looked back. The dark figure stood at the edge of the shadows, a twisted silhouette against the trees. "Come back," it roared, its voice echoing through the night, filled with a mix of desperation and rage. "You cannot escape the forest. You are mine." But in that moment, I knew I had broken the cycle. I had faced the darkness within me and emerged stronger. The shadows that had once loomed over me now felt distant, their grasp losing its hold. I was free. As I took my first steps into the light, I felt the energy of the forest shift. The Watcher's form flickered and began to dissipate, its presence fading into the night as if the very essence of it was unraveling. I turned and ran, my heart racing as I dashed toward the light, toward the world beyond the forest. But as I reached the edge of the clearing, I felt a cold gust of wind whip through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. A figure, almost familiar, beckoned to me with an outstretched hand, another lost soul, forever trapped in the grasp of the Watcher. With a gasp, I hesitated, my heart aching at the thought of leaving them behind. But I remembered the strength I had found within myself, the light that had guided me through the darkness. I had fought to reclaim my life, and I would not let the shadows pull me back. With one last look at the forest, I turned and ran, the light growing brighter with every step. The whispers faded, replaced by the sounds of the world beyond, the laughter of those I had loved, the warmth of sunlight on my skin. I would carry the memory of the forest with me, but I would not allow it to define me. As I crossed the threshold, the light enveloped me, and I felt a rush of freedom that swept through me like a cleansing tide. The forest was behind me, its shadows receding into the distance, and as I stepped into the embrace of the outside world, I knew that I had escaped. But deep within my mind, a whisper lingered, a reminder of the Watcher that had once pursued me, a haunting echo of the darkness I had faced. I was free, but the forest would always hold a piece of me, an unbreakable connection to the shadows that lurked just beyond the edge of light. And though I had escaped its grasp, the knowledge remained that I was forever changed. I was not just a survivor, I was a witness to the depths of fear, a guardian of the light that could chase away the shadows. The forest would continue to call to those who wandered too far, but I had found my way back, and I would ensure that the stories of those lost would not fade into silence. I had escaped, but the echoes of the forest would forever linger in the depths of my soul, a reminder that darkness and light exist in an eternal dance, and within every shadow lies the potential for redemption. As I stepped into the light, I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth wash over me, and with it, I let go of the fear that had bound me. I would carry on, a survivor of the shadows, a testament to the strength that lies within the human spirit. But in the quiet corners of my mind, the whisper remained, a reminder that I had faced the darkness and emerged, yet the forest would always be there, waiting, watching, and forever hungry for the next soul to wander too close.